Welcome to the Washington State University Farmers Network webinar series. This webinar is brought to you today by the Soil Health Initiative. Your host is Dr. Haiying Tao, and our guest for today is Mrs. Cheryl Zachariason, a farmer on the Palouse of Eastern Washington State. Welcome, Cheryl.
Yes, we are in just north of Pullman on the Palouse Highway, and we farm in the high rainfall zone of the Eastern Palouse. And we are pretty much a conventional. So we were a conventional minimum, 2 minimum till. Sometimes if we didn't get scope creep or recreational tillage moving along. And we also pretty much followed the recommendations that our agronomist gave us as far as fertility and pest control. And our results were typical for a farm. We had decent yields, but what we noticed was inconsistent and in some places declining soil health. We also had high input costs, which just seemed to be increasing, and especially with the prices of commodities right now, we had low revenue. We also experienced a bit of erosion if we did not time our tillage well. No problem. So these are some of the examples of the soil, and this is from our 2019 winter wheat crop that we took off in August. And this is a particularly wet piece of soil. And you can see there's not much residue on top. It's very poor quality. It is dry and cracking. The yields tend to be poor in these areas. One of the things that when I did the numbers last year, we had 2018, we had one of the best winter wheat yields we had ever had on our farm. And we had put all the fertility that you needed to. We used all the herbicides that were recommended, and had great yields. And yet it was, when I did the numbers, the least profitable of all of our crops. And that's when I came to the realization that we needed to do something different, because the model we were using for farming wasn't going to work for the long term. So what we decided to do is really rethink our cropping practices in our farming. And the first thing we did was we adopted the principles of soil health, which I'll explain in a minute. And we also adopted, we've read a lot and I've studied a lot of the holistic management from Alan Savory. And so we adopted and created a holistic goal for our farm. It also meant that we needed to change our attitudes and perspectives on what a successful crop was. We needed to rethink the aesthetics, because I don't know what everyone else's perception is, but around here, the more uniform the soil and the crop, the more you can see that beautiful black dirt, the better off you are. And we had to really have hard conversations about, is that really the best for our soil health? And what we wanted to do was increase the photosynthetic capacity for each acre on our farm, so we could get carbon back into the soil, because our soils in this area are carbon depleted. So we also needed to change our attitudes about yields, because high yields do not correlate with high profitability in a fair number of circumstances. So we decided to go for a motto of profit, not yield. And then we also really had to look at our cost per acre. So our farm goal was basically to farm in such a way that we have healthy soils, finances, farmers, and ecosystems, and that we would be a source of information for other people as we learn, because this is now coming into our second year of doing this, so we are still learning. And what we concluded after we evaluated what we were doing was that we needed to take care of our soil biology first in order to abide and work within the parameters of the principles of soil health. So the principles of soil health is one, minimize disturbance. So we traded in our 455 drills, parked all of our tillage equipment, really lucked out and got a good deal on a set of 1890 drills, and started just direct seeding. So all we do now is we stream on some fertilizer, and then we come in with our 1890 drills. So well, it's 2 passes, but there's only one that's even remotely in the soil. When you're minimizing disturbance, it also means to us that you need to minimize the chemical disturbance as well. So we also stopped using seed treatment, and we've really tried to scale back the pesticides that we use. So the next one is to increase diversity. And how we did that was we started intercropping and then doing some cover crops. So we were getting different plants, different leaf sizes in the field, so you can capture that sunlight differently, and then it sends down that carbon down into the roots, and all of those different roots do different things and feed different microbes. So diversity is good. Shield the soil. What we really tried to cover as much as possible at all times as possible. For the sake of transparency, the field that you're looking at right now is we didn't get our C to N ratio correct because we are learning. And so a lot of this residue disappeared pretty quickly. But we are working to adjust what we do, so we do shield the soil. It protects it from rain, it keeps it covered, and protects the microbiology in the soil, and we feel that that's really important. And then also living roots for as much of the year as you can possibly have. So what we did was we have annual crops, so there is a dearth, if you will, for microorganisms from the time that crop starts dying down until you sow again. And sometimes that can be July until the following spring in April, if you're lucky to get in at that point. So what we did was we inserted some perennials into our annual crop, things that were pretty polite, but would maintain some nutrients for the microbiology. And then the fifth soil principle, so we've got minimize your disturbance chemically and mechanically. You've got increased diversity, shield the soil, and always have living roots, or have living roots as much as possible. And then the fifth one is livestock. We are still trying to figure out how to do this one correctly and properly. At this point, our attitude is we're feeding the microbiology, and that is our livestock in the soil. But livestock can really kickstart your nutrient cycling, and that's another piece of what you're after when you're looking at soil health. The sixth principle, and this is one that Gabe Brown discusses, is that you apply the first 5 principles within the context of your farm and your situation. So for us, livestock is a little problematic at this point, and we're not quite sure how to do it. So we adjust what we do. We don't say, oh, well, we can't do this, or we force these principles on how everyone else is doing them, because the context of your farm is different from everyone else's. And that's important to remember. So how we did this was, or our goals were to increase nutrient cycling, to increase soil organic matter, increase our water infiltration. And this was how we were going to apply those 5 principles, and they kind of feed into each other. So what we did, but I'll give it a go here, we stopped tilling. We used untreated seed, which is pretty radical in this area, but we've used it before and we've been very successful. And we actually did it with our winter wheat this fall and it looks good. And the reason we did that was we didn't want to send any broad spectrum fungicides or pesticides into the soil to compromise what we're trying to do as far as increased soil biology. We also reduced our fertilizer rates. So what we did last spring of 2019, and then we did it again in the fall of 2019, was we applied 50 pounds of solution 32 on the ground. We just streamed it on and then came in with our drills. And then this fall, we did the same thing with about 5 pounds of sulfur. And what we'll do is this spring, we'll again apply 50 pounds of N as in solution 32 and on our barley, nothing on our pea fields. And then we'll test the winter wheat. We'll take tissue tests for the winter wheat because I expect we're going to have to give it some nutrition. Our ultimate goal is to wean our ground off of fertilizers and to allow that microbiology, the microbial relationship with the roots and get that nutrient cycling going. And the thought is that really in order to get the nutrient cycling going, you have to reduce your fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer rates, but you have to wean your ground off. So everyone warns everyone else, don't just stop with the fertilizer because you will have a disaster. So we only spot spray where we need it. We don't wholesale spray all the fields. And then this year what we're going to try is there's evidently some research that's gone in that basically says that you can reduce your herbicide rates by 50% if you add a carbon with it. So if you add some humic acid, a little bit of compost tea, that carbon helps the plants uptake that herbicide. So you don't want to do it on top, if you're trying to spray something over your cash crops. But if you're just focusing on trying to get yourself out of a weed situation, that's a good way to go. And we're going to be trying it this year. And then the other thing we do is we intercrop in our cash crops. So what I've done is chosen crops where the cash crop is the tallest crop that's there. And then the intercropping is pretty low canopy, clovers, some forbs, grasses in our pea, and that's pretty much oats. And if anyone wants what we've done as far as intercropping, contact Haiying and I can send that information on. We also took about 6 acres on our ground and set it aside for insectiaries. So we planted a spring mix insectiary in different places on our farm to allow habitat for beneficials. And we found that to be just a fabulous way to do things. Last year was a different year because it was such a harsh winter. I don't think we had the pest pressure, but we haven't sprayed pesticides, insecticides for a couple of years now and don't plan on doing so. The other critical thing that we did was we used the expertise around us. So we partnered with Palouse Conservation District, WSU faculty and scientists, U of I, and USDA, ARS, and NRCS. So our observations go along the following. This is our this is coming into our second year. And the slide that you see has, I'm really supposed to tell everyone this because my husband is very concerned that people think that we planted something that killed the crop. It is a turnip, and basically this is in October. And we just took some pictures of the turnips. We put turnips and radishes in where we think we really need it because it's really good at opening up the soil and feeding that biology over time. And it's really, especially radishes are very good at scavenging nutrients and bringing them up to the surface. The one thing I will say is if you're thinking about intercropping, don't follow the recommendations for a specific thing. For example, radishes. We were really careful and only put 2 pounds of radishes per acre, and that was still too much. And so it caused us some headache this year as far as harvest. And this was in our barley crop. So what we saw was where the ground is fabulous and it's an obvious thing, but it's amazing how you can cover it up unless you really start evaluating. It's kind of a ground truth thing, unless you start evaluating your soils. Where the crops were really good, they were fantastic. They were unbelievable. Where the soil's really good. Where the soil's bad, they're very poor. And this is an example of some fairly degraded soil that we had in barley, and you can see some radish, a lot of radish around, and it did not do well. I will say that we did not take a yield hit. We still got 2 tons to the acre, which is good. And so like in the really good ground, we were getting 4 ton, and in the really bad ground, we were getting like 1,800 pounds. Just some examples of some really big purple top turnips that we had. So this is an example of an insectary that we planted. There were things like nasturtiums and marigolds that just came up and grew, and it was just really fantastic. Some phacelia, some brassicas, and the insect population was just really wonderful. And again, another one. And what we also found was when we had the insectary, we put them in our wetter spots. And there was so much competition and there was so much diversity in what was there that it actually took out the Italian rye that we had in that spot. So that spot, we had planted the whole thing. There was concern that it wasn't going to populate, that the insectary wasn't going to come up. So we sprayed it out, and what happened was you could see exactly where we sprayed it out. It was bare ground, which is kind of a no-no. And there was Italian rye that just took off and went into the crop. So these are some photos from this fall. And this is what you see is we sowed right in our winter wheat right into the stubble. It's not a lot of stubble. Again, our C to N ratio was probably a little off, so we didn't have enough carbon. And this was kind of a hay bet barley hay field that we had done. But the only disturbance are the single opener drills. And just what I've started doing now is when I go out to the field and look at what's going on and evaluate weeds in our stand and what's happening, I always take a shovel with me, and am trying to get into the habit of also taking a thermometer with me. And the shovel is really great because you can dig in, you can see what's going on, you can start seeing whether you have roots, if there are worms coming into the fields, because we've tilled, we've not had worms in our fields, and this year was the first year that we actually had a lot of worm activity and castings. This is a really good example of how quickly the residue is degrading. And what we did for our intercrop for this winter was we did winter wheat, Wharton lentils or winter lentil, a little bit of radish, 1/2 pound, not 2, and some golden flax, and then some clovers. So we're getting the fours, we're getting the grasses, we're getting a brassica, and then a couple of legumes to help us with our nutrient cycling. So, one of the things that we really believe is that, there's our sheep. one of the things that we really believe is that we are a part of nature. We're not separate from it, and that we have to really steward and make sure that nature can thrive, because if it doesn't, we won't. And I really do believe that Wendell Berry's quote is true. And there is a photo bomb here that I should let you see. Up, there he goes. And these are the sheep that we have. We have dorpers, a small flock of dorper sheep, and then a small herd of goats. One of the other things that we did do is we set aside it's about a 10-acre field, and you can see it right here, and it's been grazed already, but it was done with an 11-way mix. So we put everything in the sink into it. We put in radishes, we put in, oats, hay-bet barley, we had lentils in there, we had faba beans, and then, sunflowers. We just had all sorts of stuff, a couple of clovers in there. And what we found was a lot of the hilltops we had in CRP up until fall of 2018. And so we decided to take them out because those were some of our most degraded soils, and just really pay attention to trying to build them back up. And so what we did on those hilltops was we either put them in a cover crop like this one, or if they were in the rotation of fields that we want to crop. In fact, some of them were in a pea rotation, and we were really concerned about erosion. So what we did for those was we put in peas in an oat mix. Boy, I'll tell you, oats just did a fabulous job for us as far as really giving that soil a bit of an umph and kind of giving it some condition. So the other thing that I've observed is just how resilient at least our soils were. And so that gives me a lot of hope that we can do a lot to get our soils up and running and a lot more healthy than they are. Because someone has said, we have no idea how degraded our soils are because we don't know what healthy soils look like. And so to me, it's a really important task to try to farm in a way that I can not just sustain my soils, but to improve them so that I can leave improved soils to someone else. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. It is so great to see that farmers like you started experimenting on your own farms and willing to share your results and your experience with other farmers. And thank you so much for that.
Hi, Ying.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Another two questions just popped up, but I have a question about some of the marketing and how the economics of this are coming together for you.
Oh, thank you. That's a critical piece. For us, we direct market our barley and peas. So we have a little room. We have a lot of flexibility as far as what we can intercrop with. And we feel we can make some mistakes that maybe other people can learn from. Our wheat, we do market through the traditional channels. But the peas and barley, we do market directly, and the people who buy them from us are very supportive with what we do, but it is a different market than what most people would experience. However, there are people, especially up in Canada and Saskatchewan area, who grow peas, canola, and I think lentils together, and what they've figured out how to do is to harvest them so you set your combine for the largest seed, and then what you do is you dump it in the truck, and then they have what they call a gravity separator. So then they separate the crops out at the point of storage.
And there's a question, how much precipitation in your area? And can you talk about interactions between intercropping and water availability?
We get about 23 inches of precipitation, but as it's been pointed out, if your soil isn't able to accept that precipitation, that's not your effective rainfall. So your effective rainfall is what your soil takes in and retains. So what I think, when you're tilling and stuff, I would love to see some numbers about how much rain actually we capture. And I think infiltration tests do that in a roundabout way. We have not seen an issue because the other thing is that what should happen if you get your nutrient cycling up correctly and if you've got good microbiological activity, one of the things that's pretty wonderful is that you can have, if you have mycorrhizal fungi, they will actually connect with the roots and give that root more effective area to gather nutrients and water. So, you do have to be careful and manage it correctly, but there are some folks up in the Waterville, up in the Okanagan and Douglas County who are doing intercropping with triticale and some pretty wild and crazy things. And those crops actually look really good. And they don't, it's not just a system of they're pulling water out and sending it back into the atmosphere through transpiration or growing because you need water for that. It's a more complex interaction. And if you're in a drier area, the people to talk to are people like, Rob DeWald, Tom and Doug Poole, because they've done a lot of this work in that summer fallow area. In fact, they're trying to replace their summer fallow with cover crops and intercropping.
Yeah, that sounds great. It seems like we should invite them to give a follow-up little webinar on intercropping and cover cropping in the dry area. Do you have any suggestions for improving existing pasture?
Oh, yeah. One of the things to take a look at is it's improving existing pastures, but it's also how did they get that way? Because I think there's a two-part piece or a two-part question at least where it's like, why are they degraded to that point? What practices happened? What's been happening in the past? We don't have that much pasture. And so the best place to look, because I don't feel that I'm an expert on that, is to go to Gabe Brown's book, From Dirt to Soil, and he talks about how they've improved pastures. And then the other thing is to look at Alan Savory's holistic management. And within that field of thought, there are ways that you can look at grazing and how to improve pastures.
Did you try out different seed mix? And how do you decide what are the mixes that you want to choose?
Yes, we did. We did different seed mixes. So we've done with our barley, what we did was we put in what we do. I'll back up. There is a really handy dandy tool, and it's provided by a seed company that's in Nebraska, and it's called Green Cover Seed, and the web address is greencoverseed.com, and they have a tool, and it's called Smart Mix. And so what you can do is you go in, you give them your growing zone, through your zip code, you tell them how long your growing season's going to be and how many acres and if it's organic or not, or irrigated or dry land. And then they'll basically say, what are your concerns for this field? Is it nutrient cycling? Is it covering it? Is it just different, do you want weeds to deal with weeds, etc. So there are several options that you can select, and that's what we did. So we said we wanted nutrient covering, we wanted to increase organic matter, or nutrient cycling, increase organic matter, and then cover the soil. And so then it actually is a database, and it'll pull up the different types of plants that you can use. And I always try to say, they'll ask you, what's your next cash crop? And so I'll tell them what the next crop in my rotation is, but then I make sure that I include the cash crop that I'm going to use in this intercropping. So what I'm doing is selecting for plants that will help me either nutrient cycle, scavenge nutrients. So with the barley, we wanted to scavenge nutrients. We wanted to see if we could get a little bit better handle on some hard pan, and we wanted to get some nitrogen into the ground. So what we did was we had barley as our cash crop, and then we had radishes, and you can get, there's one that's called smart radish and then, or daikon radish. And then we had purple top turnips. So that gave us our scavenging, and that allowed us to have some carbon in the soil during the winter. And then we had red clover, and we were pretty conservative, relatively speaking, for us with that mix. And then what we did for the peas is we put in oats and some radishes, because we needed to do a lot of work just to get things up and running again. Then in the fall, what I wanted to do was provide some nitrogen for our winter wheat. And I wanted to get some mycorrhizal plants so we could encourage that mycorrhizal fungi to really start populating our soils again, because they're really important for nutrient cycling and water availability. So we did winter wheat, and then we did golden flax, Morton lentils as kind of a, and these were all selected because they were also fairly low growing except the radishes. Daikon radish, half a pound, and then balansa and red clover. And they're perennial clovers, relatively polite, so they won't just take over everything, but they'll stay in that understory so we can harvest over the top and get our cash crop. And then this spring, what we're going to do is we'll put in some, in our winter pea fields, we're actually going to do Phacelia, which is also another really good mycorrhizal plant, as well as a really good pollinating, so it encourages beneficials, peas, some oats, and then let's see, peas, oats, and then sugar beets to, again, just be a storage for sugars. And our barley will have a couple of clovers, some radishes, because we need to pay attention. That's the last ground that needs to come into our system. So, but green cover seed and the Smart Mix database is a fabulous tool. And then USDA also has a chart, and it's kind of a take on the oh gosh, now I'm going to go back to my undergraduates. It's basically a cover crop table. And if you look, it's USDA, and I think it's NRCS, and it's a cover crop table, and it tells you the different types of things we'll do, different rainfalls, what works where for different environments.
Thank you all for participating in the webinar. If you have any follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to contact Dr. Haiying Tao. Hope to see you at the future webinars. Thank you.